Good evening, and welcome to today's Bible study of the Banking Blessings Ministry. I'm happy that my wife, Obi Ofebu, is able to join us today. She's a professor in Nigeria, and often we are very happy that she's with us today and will be with us for the next several Bible studies. Today we are going to look at an interesting interaction between Jacob and Laban. The interactions occurred after about 14 years, after Jacob had been in Paddan Aram with his uncle Laban for about 40 years. He had married the two daughters and had 12 children, 11 boys and 1 girl. The 12th boy, Benjamin, was born much later. Then during this time, remember that during the 14 years, Jacob served Laban in return for marrying his daughters. So at this time, Jacob felt that it is time for him to start looking for his own wealth, to start accumulating his own things. And he talked to Laban, and Laban said, "No, don't leave. I can pay you whatever you want." So they reached an agreement on how Jacob's labor, Jacob's service for Laban will be paid for using the flock. And this is an interesting agreement because it's really a business agreement between Jacob and Laban. And we'll see some of the details. In this, we're going to learn, as I said, it is a business agreement between Jacob and Laban. We're going to look at the agreement in details. The agreement we will find was incomplete. And the fact that it was incomplete led to some difficulties in implementation and some, as the wealth grew in this business, their wealth of that time was animals. As they became prosperous, the sharing agreement that they had reached, its imperfections began to show, and we'll discuss this. In fact, it became so dissatisfactory that at some point Jacob decided to leave Paddan Aram. And we will see that before Jacob left, he consulted with his wives, discussed with them, made sure that they knew what was going on and why he was leaving. And this gives us interesting lessons that we need to learn about modern day interactions. Everything we'll do today is from Genesis 30 and 31. We will begin with the things that happened before the agreement. Jacob, as I said, had been with Laban for a little over 14 years. And he went to Laban and said, I think it's time for me to go home. I've been with you for a long time and I've served you. It's time for me to start looking for my own wealth. So I need to go. But Laban knew that he has been very prosperous when Jacob was with him. In fact, he believed that his prosperity, his continued prosperity, was tied with Jacob being with him, that the Lord blessed him because of Jacob. So he told Jacob and said, "Please don't leave. Just tell me what you want. I know that the Lord has blessed me during the time you were here. So just tell me what you want me to pay you, and I will pay it." Jacob, of course, he is a very crafty person. He made his case. He said, "Look, you've been very productive during the period I was here, and I did all of this for you, so it's time for me to start building my own wealth." And we will see. Let us look at Genesis 30, 25 to 30, where we see the interactions before leading to the agreement between Jacob and Laban.
Okay, Genesis 30, verse 25. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children, for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages, and I will pay them." Verse 29. Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you, and how your livestock has fed under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?"
Yes, that is the passage, and my wife that read the passage, you have some things to say about the passage that you read.
Yes, I was looking at this portion of the scripture. It looks very interesting to me as I was reading it. I was able to see that Laban acknowledged the favor and blessings of God in his life that came to his life through Jacob. And I realized that that's something that we human beings these days don't do quite often. But the fact that Laban was able to acknowledge that God has blessed him through Jacob must have done something to Jacob to make him realize, I have been of blessing, even though I was a tool in the hands of God Almighty. So it's very good for you to acknowledge blessings that God has blessed you through human beings, other people. Then I was also able to see that Laban used tender words by acknowledging what Jacob is and all that. And tender words and appreciation were able to make, I don't know what would have happened if he had said, "Well, Jacob, you didn't do anything, so why are you talking to me that way? If you want to go, go." So I don't know what Jacob would have done. But because he used tender words, Jacob was able to respond positively.
That's very good. That's quite true. Laban acknowledged that the Lord has blessed him through Jacob, acknowledged that Jacob has been useful to his life, and that he recognized that it is time for Jacob to start making his own, but he didn't want Jacob to leave. He felt that the two can happen side by side, that Jacob can build up his own wealth while still working for him, Laban. So he asked Jacob and said, "Name your wages." And of course, Jacob, he said, first he said, "Don't pay me anything," which is essentially saying, "Don't pay me with money. I don't want wages. Rather, I want to build up my own flock." Because Laban owned a lot of animals, sheep, goats, and all that. So Jacob said, "Okay, since I'm working for you and this is what I do, I want to build up my own flock as I work for you." Then he proposed to Laban and said, "Let us use this approach that I'm going to get." We'll read the details. I don't want to read the details, but what it is he proposes a criterion for selection of animals that will become his own while he's tending Laban's animals. So I call it a selection criterion. Okay. Laban accepted the selection criterion that Jacob proposed, and they implemented it. They followed the criterion and selected the flock that met the criteria, and they were converted to Jacob's ownership. Jacob, in fact, set some of his children in charge of the flock that he selected, and he sent them away, putting so that there is a healthy distance between his flock between the area where his flock was being tended and then what remained of Laban's flock. Let us read about this in Genesis 30, verses 31 to 36.
Genesis 30, verse 31. What shall I give you? He asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied. But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages, you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen. Agreed, said Laban. Let it be as you have said. That same day, he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, that's this spotted, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks.
Yes. Honey, do you have any comment on this one before we proceed?
My comment was, I'm looking at this, it's a business agreement, it's an agreement. And these are two people that have mingled over years, the least of which was 14 years, because I know that Jacob had to serve Laban for 7 years for each of his wives.
Yeah.
So they have been friends, the families have merged, so you really can't get any closer than that. They are familiar. But when it came to business, there had to be a firm agreement. In modern day times, we often tend to confuse family with business, confuse friendship with business, and that creates a lot of problems when it comes to sharing profits or delegation of duties and stuff like that. When you in this agreement, there was a set agreement, and when you do that, you set the way or the pace for an agreement to be honored. But when you don't have set items in the agreement, then there's nothing to implement, there's nothing to honor. So, but this is very clear. Even in church settings, we find out that people do, it's my church member, then you don't write things down. And when problem comes up, then it becomes a big issue that affects even the body of Christ. But this one, they had to put things in perspective. And this is very important. And another thing is not just putting things in perspective. You have to make sure that they are well separated. Look at what Laban did. After the separation of the speckled and spotted animals and that of the white ones, he put a 3-day journey in between to show that there is distinct separation in what we have. So when you make the agreement with itemized content, make it clear. Let there be no gray areas. That's what I found in this reading.
And this, you see, is actually, I think it is the main message of this particular Bible passage, this interaction between Laban and Jacob. That, yes, Jacob was Laban's nephew, they've lived together, but now this is a business agreement. Laban recognized and Jacob agreed that it is time for him to start building up his own wealth, and that he is going to build it up by getting a share of the proceeds of Laban's flock that he was tending. So they needed to set out how that would happen. And this is a very important lesson for us, that when it comes to business, you need to define rights and responsibilities very carefully. And in this case, the agreement covered how to share the flock, but it also covered how to recognize which animal belonged to which person. But there is an aspect of the implementation that they didn't think about carefully. And who will go through this as a lesson? Obviously, we're not going to go back and fix the agreement, that's long gone. But we can learn something that may be useful to us in setting up real-time, modern-day business agreements in any kind of business interaction. So the first implementation was flawless. The subsequent implementation brought in things they never thought about, because Jacob realized that what made animals speckled or spotted or anything was really in their environment. That when the animals were pregnant, what they were looking at, or at the time they mated, the things they were looking at influenced what came out. And if that is the case, then Jacob sought to manipulate the environment in order to bias things in his favor. Some people look at it, they say Jacob was cheating. Well, if you think about it, there was nothing in the agreement about what the animals, how to control the environment of the animals. If you let the environment all gray, all the animals will come out gray, and Jacob will go home with nothing. So he did what he could to influence what the animals would be seeing as they were producing. Of course, somebody can question, whether he was fair or he wasn't fair. But this detail was not specified in the business agreement. So it was open to interpretation. His own interpretation allowed him to devise a scheme to bias the selection. Now, Laban himself, we will find in the next passage we're going to read. Laban himself, as things were proceeding, he realized that this was not working in his favor. And as Jacob told us, Laban changed the criteria several times. Each time he will come, say, okay, now your sheep and your goat will be those that have this kind of feature. Again, that's something that was not specified in the agreement. Who had the right to change it? How could it be changed? Should it even be changed? The process for, when you make an agreement, the process for changing the agreement should be part of the agreement, so that nobody will try to change it unless the person follows that process. In this case, there was no process, so Laban changed it at will. Now, whatever they did though, the result was that Jacob's flock increased. Jacob got more and more, and Laban wasn't happy with what Laban wasn't happy what Jacob was getting, but he didn't know how to control it. He didn't know how to change it, because that was the agreement. Let us read this in Genesis 30 verses 37 to 43, and then Genesis 31 verses 5 to 8.
Genesis 30, verse 37 to 43. Verse 37. Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them, by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all, Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs, so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself, and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals, so they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks, and maidservants and menservants, and camels and donkeys. Chapter 31. Genesis 31, verse 5 to 8. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young.
Yes, so we saw here there was problem. Jacob, interpreted the rules and did what he could to influence the outcome in his favor. Laban changed the rules as they went along, and he changed so many times that Jacob complained, in fact, at the end, and said, look, this man changed my wages 10 times, but each time he changed, God worked in my favor, and the animals that, my flock continued to increase, even though he didn't want my flock to increase. So the business agreement worked out, but he raised problems, and part of the problem was either maybe because the agreement itself should have been different, or maybe there should have been more details in the agreement. But what this is, one of the things this is telling us, we'll look at it a little more. As a matter of fact, that's the next installment. Yeah. That is, the agreement did not think about what influenced the selection. That they defined the selection, how Jacob would select his flock, but they did not think about what influenced, what made the animals develop strict coloration, what made them become spotted. They didn't think about that. They didn't. Laban didn't appreciate the fact that this could be influenced by the environment, and Jacob, being the shepherd, could manipulate the environment for things to work out in his favor. Laban, when he saw that things were working out more in Jacob's favor, he couldn't change anything. He just said, okay, let's change the rules. You are getting too many animals. I'm not as rich. I'm getting poorer and you're getting richer. Let's change the rules. So he will change the rules. But then the rules, as they implemented the rules, he found out that it didn't solve his problem. It made things worse for them. Then he will change the rules again. So what this is telling us is that there was, while the business agreement that Laban and Jacob had was well intentioned, that there are details that they didn't think about. For example, instead of saying let's use spotted animal, let's check which animal is spotted or which one is streaked, they could have simply said, oh, let's, after every 3 months, let's go through the animals, let them pass through a gate. As they pass, every second animal or every third animal will be sent to a fenced area over there, and every first and second animal will be sent to a fenced area over there, and whatever is in this fenced area belongs to Laban, and whatever is in that fenced area belongs to Jacob. And then at the end, Jacob will have to take his own and put a distance between them as they did. We cannot specify details of every agreement before the agreement is made. But the principle is this, that when you are setting up a business agreement, think about the implementation of the agreement. It's not just, the agreement has to define rights and responsibilities very clearly, and it has to define how things will be implemented. It has to define how things can be changed, how the rules can be changed. Problem occurred because the agreement did not have these details in it. Well, because of this, Jacob considered leaving. First of all, he had accumulated a lot of wealth, so he felt it was time to leave. But also, he noticed that Laban wasn't very happy with him anymore. Laban's children weren't happy. They saw how rich Jacob was, and they thought that their father they thought Jacob got more than he deserved, and they weren't happy about it, and Jacob didn't want to continue staying there. So he also had an encounter with God, in which God told him in a dream to return, that it is time for him to return to his cradle. And that is very important. So Jacob decided that it was time to go. We'll see what he does next. But first of all, let us read about this, his interaction with God and why he decided it was time to go. In Genesis 31, verses 1 to 3.
Genesis 31, verses 1 to 3. Verse 1. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you.
Okay, before we continue, do you have something to say about this passage, or do you want to wait for us to?
What I have to say about this is that it's always very important to listen to God when you walk with God, because of Jacob's relationship with God, he was able to hear God, to know that it's time for him to leave. And when you are walking with God, it's not, you don't move away at the slightest sign of trouble. You always have to go back to God to ask questions. Is it time or is it not time? The sign of trouble in a relationship, the first sign of trouble does not mean that's the time to split. But he was able to hear God, and God will tell you when it is appropriate for you to take the next step. And in this case, God told him, it's not just that he felt Laban's attitude had changed, but God also told him it's time to leave.
So Jacob decided that it is time to leave based on his interaction with God and based on the fact that he saw that things weren't going so well between him and Laban and Laban's children. But Jacob himself is married. He's married to Laban's daughters, married to Rachel and Leah, and they have children that also are grandchildren of Laban. But more important, he saw that his wives have a stake in the outcome. They are his wives. He could order them. He could say, okay, oh, God told me to leave, so let's get up, pick up your things, let's go. But he decided, and this is very important, he decided that he needed to convince them. He needed to take them along, not just taking them along physically, but to make sure that they understood why he was considering leaving, and that they agreed with him. So he called Rachel and Leah to a meeting. First he told them that Laban, their father, was no longer as friendly to him as he used to be. Then he talked about what happened in their business relationship. He believed that Laban cheated him many times by changing his wages. He said Laban changed his wages 10 times. Then he also talked to them about the fact that God has helped him, that God has been with him despite Laban's treatment. We will discuss this Jacob's case to his wives more, but let us read about this section in Genesis 31 verses 4 to 7.
Genesis 31 verse 4. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me.
So Jacob continued. He talked to them. He said that the flocks produce offspring that will always favor him. That Laban continued to change the rules, but the flocks always produce offspring that favored him under the rules that Laban was making. Then he said that through this process that God has given him ownership of a sizable fraction of Laban's livestock. And this followed business rules that two of them agreed on. He was telling his wife, say, look, yes, I have all these things, but we followed the rules. This is what we agreed on. I didn't steal them. This is mine. God was with me and made sure that my flock continued to increase. Then he told them also that God has told him to leave Paddan Aram and return to his cradle in Canaan. Let us read about this interaction between Jacob and his wives in Genesis 31 verses 8 to 13.
Genesis 31 verse 8. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land.
So, honey, do you have something to say before we look at the response of Rachel and Leah?
Yeah, it's very interesting in this place that, I keep emphasizing when we do things, whether it's in business or in our personal lives, in anything, we have to put God first. And when we put God first, there comes a time, He takes care of everything that concerns us. Look at Jacob in the midst of, though he has amassed quite some wealth, but a relationship with his extended family, that is Laban, his father-in-law, was being broken. And I can imagine how he felt. But even in that problem, God was there. Because sometimes you say, oh, is this of God? This is not right. This is not, you're breaking up with your father-in-law. But God was there directing him. And why was God there? God remembered the vow that Jacob made to him at Bethel. When Jacob, made a vow and built an altar there for God, God remembered it, came down and said, now leave this land. So that vow, that what Jacob did at that time became a memorial, and God remembered him for that. and still came to his help at this time.
So Jacob has talked to his wives, explained, made his case. Now his wives responded. They said, Rachel and Leah, they said, look, we can no longer expect, we are no longer our father's, we no longer belong to our father's family. Our family is with you, Jacob. That whatever they had, it is now Jacob, the two of them, Rachel and Leah, and their children. So whatever Jacob has belong to them. Whatever God has given him, belong to them. And they will not expect, if something were to happen, they do not expect to get anything more from their father. They made a joke here that he has, that their father has, I think you see this in the Bible patches, that their father sold, that their father sold them to Jacob and has spent whatever he got on their behalf, on the behalf of, or got from Jacob for his marrying them. But the more important thing is that they recognize the change in relationship that occurred when they married Jacob. That there is yes, they are still daughters of their father, but their life now, their destiny now is tied more with Jacob. That is where their life is, and they have had children with Jacob, and this is their family, and wherever Jacob will go, they will go with him. There is no question about that, and they acknowledge that, and then they told him, obey God. Whatever God told you, do it, and we will do it with you. Let us read about this, their response, in Genesis 31 verses 14 to 16.
Genesis 31 verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely, all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him.
Yeah, that's the next session. Okay. Yeah. So, after this meeting, Jacob had now convinced, he had got agreement of his wives that it is time to leave. So he packed up, and he and his family left Paddan Aram, and they headed for the hill country of Gilead on their way back to Canaan. He did not inform Laban. In fact, when he left, he kind of left when Laban was unaware of it. He waited for Laban to not have full attention in his direction. Then he picked up his things and left. We'll find out more about that in the next Bible study. But today, Jacob packed up his things after this interaction that we have gone through. Let us read about his departure from Paddan Aram in Genesis 31 verses 17 to 21.
Verse 17. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, and crossing the river, he headed for the hill country of Gilead.
Do you have something to say before we continue?
Yeah, at this point, all I can see is that communication has broken down between Laban and Jacob. The relationship is no longer healthy. And there are so many consequences of such action that we can see here. You know, there is lies, stealing, mistrust, because Jacob did not trust what Laban would do if he told him that he's going away. So there's no longer trust in the relationship.
Yeah.
And these are some of the consequences of communication breakdown. And communication breaks down, the relationship became very unhealthy. And some of these consequences are things that will lead you further and further away from living a godly life.
And it's important that we remember what caused the loss of health, the unhealthy, what made their relationship to become unhealthy. It's not that they quarreled, but they had this business agreement, and the implementation of the agreement departed from what each of them thought it would be. The wealth increased, the agreement had specified how to share wealth, but it wasn't specified clearly enough for each person to trust the outcome of the implementation of the agreement. So think about this when you go into business with other people, even people that are closely related to you. If you define your business agreement carefully enough at the beginning, then you reduce the chance of this type of problem arising in the business. But if the business agreement is defined haphazardly, everybody is happy at the beginning. When the wealth begins to come, or if other unfavorable circumstances should develop in the business, then there will be time to share wealth or to share losses. And if your business agreement is not clear enough, then there is a potential for problem. The problem that developed between Jacob and Laban was mainly because they were not happy with how the business had progressed. They got a lot of prosperity, but the sharing of the prosperity was not properly defined in the business agreement that they used.
Yeah, honey, I wanted to also add about, as a woman, it's very important, Rachel and Leah's response to their husband when he told them. I know you mentioned this, but we have viewers, we have male, female, but it's very important for us to know that as women, once you are married, that your husband becomes the authority over your life.
Yes.
And it's very important that we remain on the same side. As far as your husband is not leading you into something that you say is sinful, or is not commanding you to go and do something that is destructive or sinful or that is not righteous, then we have to be under submission and to do that. So it's a very good example here that despite the fact that Laban is Rachel and Leah's father, they still stood with their husband because that is where their future is.
Yes.
And then this oneness is what God requires of couples so that things can move forward in one direction for them. I can imagine what would have happened to Jacob if Rachel and Leah, or even one of them, said, "No, I'm not living with you. I'm taking my children, I'm staying back in my father's house. You cannot do that to my father." Yeah. That would bring another kind of confusion, another kind of misdirection, and it opened another door of destruction or lack of focus in Jacob's life.
Yes, in fact, this leads us directly to the next slide, because we would like to discuss the consultation that Jacob had with his wives. I think that is very important. First, from the point of view of the wives using that opportunity to demonstrate a recognition of the husband's authority. But another important aspect of it is that despite Jacob recognized that despite this authority that he still had to make sure that his wives understood and agreed, that he saw his wives as stakeholders. And whenever you are doing anything, you have to make sure that the stakeholders are with you, that everybody's on the same page. So Jacob recognized his wives as stakeholders and consulted with them fully. He did not invoke his authority. He didn't say, hey, listen, I'm your husband, get up, let's leave. He could have done that, but he realized that was not the right way. That was not the type of leadership that God expected from a husband. What God expected is that you will explain to your wives, you take your wives emotionally, spiritually along with you before you can take them physically. In fact, another point here is that God had given him an instruction to leave. He could have simply come and said, hey, God said we should leave, let us go. But he recognized that is not how you execute God's command. God wants you to explain that command in a human form to the human beings that you need to take along with you. You don't just go and say, God told me, okay, let's go. Or your pastor in your church, oh, I had a dream last night, God told me, so this is what we must do. No, he has to take you along, which means you have to explain to people what it is that you are trying to accomplish and how it will work in their interest. The fact that God said it is very important, and you will use that, but don't rely on that alone. And of course, as my wife said, Rachel and Leah recognize that they are one with Jacob. Once you get married, the person you are married to, the two people that the couple that are married become tied together into one. And they need to do this together, they need to stand together. Jacob recognized this, his wives recognized this. So this worked out quite well for them. A few more remarks that we've already said this over and over, so we're not going to beat it up. But it's just to collect what we have learned here. One is the importance of stakeholders in whatever you are doing. In this case, the stakeholders were Jacob's wives, but stakeholders could be business partners, they could be other members of your family. Whenever you are doing something, make sure that you take the stakeholders along with you. Don't try to impose on them. Even if you are acting under God's command, yes, it's good to know that God has commanded, but God wants you to explain that to people in a way that they will understand. And then, of course, tell them that God said so. Then, and even if you are in a position of authority over people, again, you need to explain. You need to lead by taking your people with you, not by forcing them, not by the time has gone when you take a whip and tell people, okay, if you don't go, I'll whip you. That doesn't work. You simply have to explain why. You have to make a case why. What Jacob did here, he made a very good case to his wives, and his wives agreed with him. We also learned that marriage creates a new family unit. The couple that get married, a man and woman, become one, and their unit is distinct and separate from all other relationships, even between the wives and the parents, or between the husband and the parents. Additional concluding remarks, and this is specifically for business relationships. Think ahead. Think ahead about rights and responsibilities, and then the implementation of whatever agreement you are going to make. Don't assume that the way you see it at the very beginning is the way it will always be. If you make a good agreement at the beginning, this agreement will help you and you and the people that you are business partners will remain friendly through the business. And even if you have to separate, you separate in good terms. But if you don't make a good agreement, then there is a lot of potential for problem. When profit comes, some people get greedy, or some people misinterpret they interpret the agreement their own way, and if their interpretation is not covered, is not there is no rule that defines clearly how the interpretation should be, then you run into a problem. Identify any loopholes. If there is any, you identify, develop more details to reduce the loopholes, and find ways, define conditions for changing the rules. Jacob and Laban labor wage agreement deal developed problem because they didn't cover some of these details. Honey, do you have any more remarks?
No, it's been quite a good passage that we read today, and I believe the listeners will be blessed even as they listen. And the passages have exposed to us the relationship, how to have the basis of good relationship, even amongst family, and business relationship, even within the same family. How to be able to do this right, and or the loopholes, things not to do and things to do, in order to be able to benefit from both the business relationship and the family relationship.
Okay, we thank all the people that will at one time or the other look at the video or listen to the audio of this Bible study. We thank God for giving us the opportunity to learn about business relationships, and we hope we'll learn more and more about business relationships. This program is about human relationships, and I'm confident that from time to time we'll have things to uncover that will tell us how God intended for us to relate. We hope that whoever will participate in this Bible study sometime in the future will learn something that will make a positive impact on their life and help them fulfill God's purpose for their life. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.